G'day, I'm Mark from Self-Sufficient Me, and one of the most common questions I get about dragon fruit, and I mean I get this a lot, is my dragon fruit flowers, but those flowers don't turn into fruit. What's going on? Well, in this video, I'm going to give you 8 separate tips on how to get more fruit on your dragon fruit vine. Let's get into it. Now the first tip is keeping the water up. I'm going to harvest some of these as I'm talking to you because it's time to harvest them. If you leave them on the tree, they just get smashed by the birds and animals and possums and bats. Oh, that's nice and heavy. It's a cactus, so why give it so much water? It's actually a rainforest cactus. It does love lots of water, but it doesn't like boggy ground. And that's why I've got it in a raised bed, because I didn't want to plant it directly into the ground for fear that the root ball might start to get wet, and if it stays wet the roots will rot and the plant dies. But if you don't give dragon fruit enough water, it might flower, but it'll probably throw those flowers and won't produce the fruit that you want. Essentially, it'll think that I've got to conserve water until I'm in some good times, and when I'm in the good times, then I will start producing fruit. The second tip is hand pollination. If you're finding that it's flowering profusely, but none of these flowers end up producing fruit, what you can do is you can artificially enhance pollination, because you might not be getting enough bugs or bees in the morning, or bats or moths typically at night time visiting the plant. The way you hand pollinate is quite simple. Just get a little paintbrush, collect some of the pollen, and then dab it on the stigma. That should pollinate that flower. I have to say hand pollination is easier said than done though. For the simple reason is this plant flowers at night time. The flowers are spectacular. If you get up early enough, you might see them in the daytime. The other fact about these flowers is they only last one night. So you've got to be on the ball and watch this plant like a hawk, because you can't just assume it's going to be flowering for a week or so and have plenty of time. And if you're going to cross-pollinate, which I would recommend from flower to flower, you're best off grabbing as much pollen as you can when you're pollinating the first flower or a first few, and then putting it in the fridge. It'll last a couple of weeks. Use that pollen to pollinate other flowers that bloom later on, if they're not all blooming at once, which is very unlikely. Tip 3 is grow different varieties. This one here is a red fleshed, red skin variety, and it's a fantastic plant. The different varieties may help in cross-pollination, and even the same variety but several plants might give you a better chance of cross-pollination that could enhance fruiting. The other thing about growing a selection of different varieties or types of dragon fruit is that you can see which ones perform better in your property. Some might fruit really well, others mightn't fruit much or not at all. So you can discard those plants and then concentrate on the ones that are the best performers. There are heaps of different varieties of dragon fruit on the market today, so keep an eye out for them at your local nursery or online. Number 4 is make it branch out. You can see how this thing here is pretty much ad hoc. It's all over the place. It's not the most ideal trellis to grow dragon fruit on in hindsight, because it is a bit too big. I'd prefer it on just one large post, probably half this size, and let it branch out from the top. But the key is branching out, because more branches means more chances of budding, more flowers means more cross-pollination, and more then chances of getting fruit. But it's not just that. I have a theory about branching out from my own observations over this last decade. When dragon fruit is left to grow up and up and up a structure, what happens is it will just keep growing, and it doesn't bud or it doesn't tend to flower or fruit at all. But what I have noticed is then when a dragon fruit reaches the top of a structure and naturally leans over, and this causes slight stress fractures in the vine, it causes the plant to branch out. That branching out then, I reckon, triggers flowering and thus fruit setting. The next thing I recommend is growing your dragon fruit from a cutting, not a seed. I mean, you can grow them from seed. I've done it and I'm still doing it and they're still growing, and it takes a heck of a long time. But it's not just the length of time it takes. When you're growing from seed, you're not quite sure what you're going to get. It might take 10 years or more for that plant to flower. And then will that plant be sterile? Will it be the same as the fruit that you got it from? Perhaps not. It might have been crossbred with something else to produce a better plant, and growing it from seed gets a throwback to one of those other plants that are not as good. Whereas growing from a cutting like this one, it will grow not only faster, but it will definitely be true to type, and it will flower quicker and thus fruit faster. The next tip is don't over fertilize. The worst thing you can do is put too much fertilizer in the base of this plant. And it's not that what you would think grows too much and too fast. It's the fact that extra fertilizer can make this fella actually a bit sickly. So too much love is not good for dragon fruit. You'll get really long, leggy, thin growth, and what you want is nice, thick dragon fruit vine limbs. If you see the vines are looking sick like a yellow leaf syndrome, well then yes, of course, add a good fertilizer to it, but just don't overdo it, because these plants are well adapted to harsh climates and harsh conditions, and they will grow really happily, quite frankly, in a free draining compost rather than adding extra fertilizer to it. Number 7 is grow it in the right conditions. If you live in a subtropical or a tropical climate, you're laughing. But if you're living in an area that gets fairly cold, well, it won't flower and fruit as well in cooler climates. You might be able to hear some of the parrots around. They're seeing this fruit, and this is what I said before, they're looking to hook into it. I don't mind them eating a few of them, I just don't want them to destroy all of it. Hence why I'm picking as I'm talking to you and giving you these tips. I'm not saying you can't grow these in colder climates, you just have to be aware of that. Cold can stuff with pollination on flowers at the best of times for most plants, let alone a tropical fruit that is not used to the cold weather. So if you are growing it in a cold climate, put it in a warm position, or even if you're growing it in the subtropics, it gets quite cold here. It will withstand a fair amount of cold. We can get down to 0 Celsius here. Grow it in a container even, and move it to a warmer spot through autumn and winter in colder climates. And sunlight is another thing. Try to make sure you position your plant where it gets maximum sunlight. They will grow in part shade, but if they're in the forest, they will grow up a tree 30 meters high to get to sunlight. And that's when they branch out, and that's when they start fruiting. I would put it in a place that gets at least 6 hours of sunlight per day, so it has the energy to be able to produce fruit. And the last tip I want to give you is grow varieties that are known to be good at setting fruit, like this one. Stay, because like I said, there are plenty of varieties, but I would check with the nursery before you buy the plant. Ask them, is this self-fertile? Does it need another plant to cross-pollinate? You don't want them. They're the old varieties. You want the self-fertile varieties that will produce fruit on their own. The new modern day dragon fruit plants and vines are much better at producing fruit than the old ones were. Make sure you are buying from a reputable nursery or someone who can prove to you that they are indeed good fruit setters. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and these tips help you guys out. If you've got any questions, whack them down in the comments section below. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.